Hey, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. I've got my friend Aaron Utecht here. We did a video a little bit ago where we did an introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. For those of you who are in the know, that's Matthew chapter 5 through 7. It's Jesus' first big public speech. It's where he lays out the plan and how God is and how God's kingdom is and what it looks like to be a part of this big, juicy, important stuff that historically has transcended belief and disbelief. Like pretty much everybody has acknowledged, it's a pretty good speech from Jesus. So we're focusing on that. Like I said, we did an intro video. I invite you to check that out. If you haven't already, you're also welcome to not check it out because it's the internet and you can do whatever you want. But in this video, we're just going to get into conversation together. This is stuff that we think about and we're interested in and we haven't really turned over our cards with each other on. So I just want to invite you to sit in on a conversation that we're going to have about what we make of this thing. So Aaron, this opens with, in my estimation, one of the worst strategic moves at the beginning of a rallying speech I've ever heard to get people on your side. Mm-hmm. We just did campaign season in 2016. It was milky garbage. It was juvenile, it was stupid, it was petty, it was full of gigantic promises and telling people what they wanted to hear. And in essence, Jesus here is asking people to follow him, or I guess he's Jesus, so he's commanding people to follow him. But this sales pitch is terrible because he starts out by saying,
nothing you'd want to hear.
No, blessed are all the things that nobody wants. So why would Jesus start out by saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the people who get yelled at and screamed at for thinking the wrong stuff about God? Why would he open with that if he wants people to follow him?
Yeah, that's so often in Jesus' teaching, that's kind of what he does, is he throws this curveball, and even in the parables, the part that you don't expect, that's kind of where the point lies. And so he does this often to draw you in, to make you kind of question it. So, one person that I used to listen to a lot, a musician, he used to say Jesus was a moving target. You couldn't ever pin him down. It didn't fit people's preconceptions, and he was always...
Because he was slippery?
No, because, in a sense, but not in the usual sense. So if you can't compare it to campaign season, people are trying to get people, and they're willing to say anything to get them on their team, whether it's this team or that team. Mm-hmm. Red, blue, A, B, whatever team. Jesus is saying, I'm not joining your team. You can come join my team. But he's refusing to meet expectations.
So what does a passage like this suggest to you that his team is?
That's important. So I think if each of these Beatitudes, as we call them, I think they're logically connected to one another. And one leads to the next, and that makes sense. But the starting point is poor in spirit. I don't think he means a poor quality spirit, like your spiritual life is terrible, but poor in spirit, as in you're a beggar. Spiritually speaking, you've got nothing that you can brag about. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He's introduced this idea of the kingdom. We talked about in video 1, people have this expectation what the video or the kingdom's going to be. And he says, if you want to be a part of it, here's the starting point.
Yeah, whereas normally... And we don't really live in an era with kingdoms at this point. But normally, if you wanted to get in with the fancy people, you act fancy. You fake it till you make it, or whatever. But you don't get access to the best parties and the best stuff by being visibly poor. Yet, the first line of the Sermon on the Mount is blessed are the poor in spirit. And then, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So if you're poor in spirit, does that mean... is that salvation?
So I would say that this is Jesus' opening explanation of what his kingdom is like.
Okay.
And I think the rest of the New Testament writers flesh that out further and make it clear. I do think that's what he's talking about here. I think that salvation is coming by grace. That you can't earn it, you're a beggar.
Okay, so, all right, so we need more data and... That comes up as we go along.
To make it filled in. But yes, in a word, the only way you're going to be a part of his kingdom is to realize you don't get to be there. He has to.
Yeah, I read it the same way. There have been maybe 3 or 4 times in my life where I've gone through the Sermon on the Mount pretty carefully. Once as a kid, and then later, and then later, and then later. And those other times, I wouldn't have said that blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, is like the central interpretive verse. But this time through, this last time I looked over it, I feel like that's the cipher for the entire thing. That there's awareness of your situation and your standing in comparison with God's standing. And it's that right orientation, that realization that I'm not even master of myself, let alone my domain and my own kingdom. I can't, like Jesus is going to go through and list all this stuff about how the kingdom is and what it looks like to be on board. And some of it is kind of doable, but a lot of it, I mean, it gets to the level of what you want, where your essence is, and you can't just do it.
Different.
Yeah. And so what does that do? Well, it puts you in a position where you realize, oh, I don't own the riches. I don't own the stuff that has currency in God's kingdom. I don't have it at all.
And I don't have access to it.
But God has tons of it.
God has tons of it, but I don't have access to it.
Yeah.
Unless I come begging.
So do you think that's an overstatement for me to say that is the interpretive cipher for the rest of it?
I do. I don't think it's overstatement. I agree with you.
Oh, I thought we were that close to having an awesome fight.
We could do it. But no, I do. I think a lot of it recapitulates back to that. And I think this is the first in this. I think of it as like a daisy chain.
Okay, give me the lightning version of the daisy chain.
Okay,
I've never
so
heard this before.
blessed in the poor in spirit. For that means you stand before God. You are penniless. You have nothing of currency at all. Okay? So when you realize that, and then you mourn over that, that leads to a position of, oh my gosh, this is who I really am. You're grieved over that. When you're grieved over who you truly are, that creates meekness. That creates humility. Okay? When you realize you have nothing in humility, and you start to crave the things that are actually worth something, hunger and thirst for righteousness. Okay, when you realize that you have no righteousness of your own, then you are inclined to
want mercy.
You're inclined to want mercy, and you're inclined to give mercy. Now, imagine
because you need it.
To say it differently, people who are full of self-righteousness, there's no mercy in those people.
Right.
So, and then you know that naturally leads to pure in heart, which is a single-minded focus on God, because you realize that's the only thing of value. And then when you realize all of these things about yourself, you start to realize them about the world you live in and others around you, and you want to help them. And so that blessed are the peacemakers. The peacemakers are that behind the idea behind that is the Hebrew word shalom, which is like wholeness or completeness. So it's not just like, hey, we got these people to stop fighting, but they still hate each other. It's peace, as in
reconciliation,
bringing all things to their rightful status.
So it's beyond reconciliation. It's the Egyptian notion of mot. It's things as they should be.
Familiar with that idea? Yeah,
okay.
But yes, it's all things as they should be.
Okay.
So reconciling, yes, but reconciling people together, reconciling people to their Creator, reconciling creation with humans and their Creator, bringing it all.
So how does that connect to the last one about people saying nasty stuff about you?
So when you go to talk to people about this, to go back to tell them that they also are poor in spirit and that they have nothing to boast about, they're not going to be happy. But you have done the right thing in helping them see the truth about themselves. I see that as all connected.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's a good case. I can see it. As a control, and I'm not going to do it right now, I'd be interested to see what would happen if we just took all of these and put them in a hat and mixed them up and then pulled them out and set them in whatever order to see if we could, because I feel like we might be able to connect the dots also like that.
Yep.
But that skepticism is slight. That was a really good case.
Well, that's my take. It's not inspired by any stretch, but I see them. And you could have, somebody else could have a different angle, but I see.
No, that makes perfect sense to me, though.
It's connected.
And so, if that's the case, then this opening foray, in part, is describing the process by which somebody could hear what Jesus is saying, internalize it, and be changed by it through a multi-step process.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's really key, is to understand that this whole kingdom thing, it's process.
Can I throw out a competing read on it?
Please.
Maybe it doesn't need to be competing, but I feel in my heart,
And that's important.
which is where all truth and knowledge comes from, that this opening shot is a completely counter values of the world kingdom manifesto.
Yes.
I feel like this is Jesus coming out with, I said it was contrary. You can't agree with both. I feel like this is Jesus coming out and saying, if everybody is going to get old and die someday, and you've only got this tiny bit of time, and we all have a lust for stuff, and you're going to die anyway, like you want to be nice enough to people, to be like a decent person if you choose to align toward good. But really, it's about like getting stuff that you find fulfilling and collecting things, and then you die, and then after that you're dead. And so there's a whole set of values that are very natural outgrowths of those naturalistic assumptions about the world. But Jesus is saying, there's this other world and this other thing, and it's truer and realer and better. And if there is a reality that transcends the physical, and if life goes on longer than the physical life, then there are things that matter more than this physical world, and therefore a competing set of values, a superior set of values, an opposite set of values would exist in such a world. Mm-hmm. And I feel like what Jesus is giving us here, is a description of the values of the kingdom, but not a list of things to do. And I think you'd agree with me that this is not a list of things to do. This is not the New Testament 10 Commandments. It's a description of something.
I think it's a description. That in itself is an interesting juxtaposition.
How do you mean?
So some people have said Jesus goes up on a mountain and gives a new teaching. He's a new Moses. And Matthew sort of presents him in this light.
Okay, yeah, I've heard people say that.
I don't know about that. There's an interesting parallel there. But if you assume the parallel, so Moses' law was, these are the things you have to do. Mm-hmm. Jesus' new law is you can't do
it at all.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
You can't do this whole new kingdom thing is not about doing.
Okay.
It's about realizing you're poor in spirit and there's nothing you can do.
Yes. So if it reads a little bit like the 10 Commandments, maybe that's okay. But the point is, the 10 Commandments had stuff on the list that you could not do. Like, I could theoretically not lie. I'm totally gonna lie about something. I'm like, everybody probably lies sometimes. Right. But theoretically, I could not. I'd like to not. Theoretically, somebody could have, they could not covet other people's stuff, and they could just be happy with their own stuff. But this stuff, it's not something you can even do. It's a set of values that...
It's a set of values that if you get into it, you realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think, I was just going to say, I'm tempted, you're taking my take, I'm tempted to quote an old Saturday Night Live line.
Jane, you ignorant...
Shane,
what?
Ignorant.
Which one were you going to go with? Was that it?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah. No. But I think... But this is the depth
doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I don't know why you would say that.
Yeah. So I think what you see and what you described and what I described, I think they overlap perfectly. So you're kind of talking like this is describing this realm, and just the way I described it was more the personal aspect. Like this interacts with who we are. This is not an abstract idea.
Right.
It hits home, and that's where it starts.
Let me throw this out.
Hitting home.
If this is more than just a kingdom manifesto, a different statement of values, which has been my view on it. But if there is a daisy chaining here, and this is a road or a path or a continuum toward being in the kingdom and being on board and rightly positioned to respond to God, then that would parallel really interestingly, as I flip through my brand new Bible that I'm not familiar with something that happens right at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. What you're describing is a very detailed, narrow path. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, you got Jesus saying, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. Many enter through it, but small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. That's very narrow. Like obviously, there are other levels of interpretation there that we'll get to. But this isn't just a different set of values. I like what you're saying. It's a different path.
It's a different lifestyle. So do you see that as good or bad? What do you, or I should guess that's a loaded question. Where do you,
Well, I have to say good. Jesus
where do you
said
see
it,
that
dude.
as good? Yeah,
Like, it's called the 10-minute Bible hour. I have to be for Jesus.
Team Jesus.
No, I would like to just be honest about what I see, but as we talked about in the last video, I think part of the appeal of the Sermon on the Mount is that, like, if you strip away all of the stupid stuff and all of our team loyalties and just really got down to what do you want, like really want at the deepest level for yourself and for the world,
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that didn't find this appealing. Okay, in certain ways. I think here's the thing: if you look at Sevi, that this is narrow, wide is the road that leads to destruction, narrow is the gate that leads to life, and few will find it. This is a narrow path. The really good news, though, that in itself is terrible news. It's narrow, few will find it, and you're thinking, we're sunk then. The good news is in 5:3, poor in spirit.
So if it's intimidating,
the good news is I don't have to live up to it. And Jesus says at the very beginning, there's no way you're gonna do this. There's no way you can do it. I'm here.
Yeah, and we get into that in the next section.
We get into that further, but I mean that's what makes Christianity unique, is that
and it points to another reason that these Beatitudes, these blessed are statements, can't be a New Testament 10 Commandments, because you can't fulfill these commandments without co-opting someone else. I guess you could be poor, merciful. I mean, you could and should be merciful. You can hunger and thirst for righteousness, but what about the persecution thing? Like, if these are commandments, you would have to go find someone and like pay them to hate you, or provoke them until they were mean to you.
Well,
so you could be like,
the latter is more like.
Yeah, that's more our style, isn't it?
We've seen that, haven't we?
Yeah.
People
I'm being persecuted. I'm being persecuted. What'd you do?
God.
I just groin kick, slight eye gouge. I don't know. And then he was all mad.
Yeah.
And I know it's because of my Christian T-shirt.
Yeah.
Jerk.
Yeah. And other things.
This last one though, you haven't even done anything yet, Jesus. Like, you're trying to get people to sign up for your thing. I get it. It just seems like such a lousy strategy if you want to get recruits to be like, hey, people are gonna, like, they're gonna hate you and insult you and do all kinds of horrible things to you, but it's worth it. Like, that's a really mean-sounding paraphrase of something that Jesus said that I'm sure is very smart, but what it demonstrates to me is that this can't possibly be a sales pitch.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So how would you, the average, if you were talking about a kingdom, what's the typical language that's used?
Not seeing what you're driving at.
You rally everybody. We're gonna conquer.
Yeah.
Those
sure, okay.
barbarians, or those people who don't like our political ideas. The language of kingdom is the language of conquest, and here is the language of suffering, and the way that this kingdom is gonna grow and spread and eventually take over. I mean, that's borrowing from 13. Is it Matthew 13 where he is? That's all the parables of Matthew, but the mustard seed and
the kingdom parables?
Yeah.
That's Matthew 13.
Yeah. That happens not by conquest.
Right.
And that's completely counterintuitive to every other human institution. In fact, I think, unfortunately, too many Christians, though well-intended, try to get these things to happen
By force.
by force.
Even if it's masked in political
Even
force,
if it's masked
it's still
in political force, it's still a force. Yes.
I wish everybody would do this in terms of disclosure. I really like that Jesus is
On
like,
the front end.
like, here's how this stuff is, and before I'm even out of the gate here, just so you know, like, this is probably going to be rough. And in most circumstances, historically, it has been. We built a little Christian utopia briefly in this country that made it easy for a while, but that seems like it's going to be a pretty short-lived thing. For the most part, being into these values has set people at odds with folks who aren't into those values or have figured out a way to play the world system well enough that anything outside of that would be a big threat. We got to hit time out there. We're going to get to the next chunk of Matthew 5 in the next video and into a series of statements that Jesus makes that are kind of mind-melting, but we'll tackle that in a second. So more stuff to come. Again, this is my friend Aaron Utech. Aaron Utech, at Aaron Utech, that's your Twitter?
Yeah, just
A-R-O-N.
my first and last name, A-R-O-N, yeah.
Yep, look this guy up. He's worth keeping track of. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. We'll see you on the other side.